it's only 2 slides. I can email you that and a link to the film.
There's something different. Don't gotta hear what they speaking. No, no, you're gonna take what they get.
Is it working? Yeah. Yes.
All that. So maybe are very, that you can also Google and find out. They found the client. I know he or she is saying that, then they're definitely doing a cross verification of your cost. So you have to figure.
Very touch of the ground and say my journey of 22 cars is coming to an end.
Yeah, okay. Great, huh? One more.
I think some parts. How are you? Good evening. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
How could I not see? I'll give you 5 minutes.
मतलब उसको ऐसे
Where is that?
It's in the there's a number.
मी उद्या हा सांगतो मी हां
All right, good evening. What, I think I caught you by surprise, so let's try that once again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Well, I'm Zenia Fernandez, your host for this evening, and on behalf of Hindustan Times, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to Power Play, an evening where we will talk about fueling growth through sports. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your Friday evening with us. But I must admit that you've taken an absolutely good call. It's a great decision, and let me tell you why. So you'll agree with me when I say that all of us in the room, we're in the middle of advertising message overloads, right? And in such times, if there's one part of our lives that really offers something that is as real as emotions, for example, then, ladies and gentlemen, that has to be sports. And, of course, with that comes the enormous possibilities of making everything more real and more lovable, including businesses and brands. Be it changing brand images or tapping into new groups, sports is undeniably the winning choice for brands, both in the world and, of course, now in our country as well. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kick off by talking about one such stories. Now, people love good stories, right? And it could be that easy to describe how and why storytelling works. If you want to generate more attention for your brand with sponsorship, then of course, sports always has exciting stories to tell. The Barclays sponsorship is one such great case study where the ideal message fit the sponsor, the spokesperson, and of course, the target group in equal measure. Let's take a look.
Are we there yet? What are you, 5? Who says that? Hizi napita tu zikienda. Twende. Brucey, open up in there, man. Morning, princess. Let's go.
Long-distance relationships can be the hardest. To the millions of fans around the world who make the Barclays Premier League what it is, we say, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to know more about the Barclays sponsorship of what's described as the world's most watched league, Premier League. Let's welcome on stage former director and head of sponsorship partnerships and relationship management at Barclays, Jonathan Neal, with a warm round of applause, of course. Welcome to the stage, Jonathan. Joining him in conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is editor, personal finance, Hindustan Times, Vivina Vishwanath. Vivina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Jonathan, we'll start with a very basic question. Why did you pick sports sponsorship for Barclays? And I think it started in 2001. Why not before 2001? And why in 2001? And post that, how has sports sponsorship helped build Barclays as a brand?
It's a good place to start with the easy questions. I like that. First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation. Great to be back in India. I was here in 2014 last, actually working with Barclays on the Barclays Premier League activation. So very good to be back in the country. And I say thank you for extending the invitation to come along and speak to you tonight. Sports sponsorship, hopefully the video that you saw, that was a few years old when Barclays was the title sponsor of the Barclays Premier League. The one key thing for me, but also when I was at the organisation and going forward, is that sponsorship is about emotional engagement, it's about passion. That's what the video was trying to show. You didn't see any goals, you didn't see any players, you just saw the rituals and the lives of where it impacted people. So sports sponsorship for us is about emotional engagement and passion, and that you can then engage your target audiences within that as well. Secondly, I'd probably say how flexible the medium is, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the activation examples and some of the things that we could do. Sports sponsorship is a highly engaging passion point for many people. So that suited Barclays, who are a global bank, global aspirations, and could align that alongside the Barclays Premier League. Spend in the sponsorship market, we talked earlier on, it's about 60 billion US dollars on an annual basis. Sport accounts for about 70% of that spend. So we picked an area with quite a diverse business that was quite a sophisticated market within sport. So they were probably 2 or 3 of the reasons why.
Right. And why did you pick football and not any other sporting events? And what was the way to convince the board to spend a multi-million dollars on Premier League?
You're always tricky trying to convince the board to spend money. Why football? If you go back a step, Barclays is over 325 years old now. Its heritage is in England. The Premier League is arguably one of England's biggest properties and products that it takes overseas. So there was a natural fit in that respect. And also for the growth of the Premier League moving forward, it was a relatively clean area for Barclays to come into and own it and really position itself at the top in a league at the very top of that competition. So that was very advantageous for Barclays in that respect. Convincing the board, it's like any business decision. We were talking earlier on that you've got to have a valid reason, objective for what you want to do something, a balanced argument about how you're going to actually achieve it. Importantly, and I know we're going to talk about it later on around measurement, how we're going to measure it, and ultimately what we're going to get out of it. So we put together a business case that was based on the level of investment at the time, based on the activity that we felt we wanted to do to engage our audiences and to deliver the results that we wanted, and then ultimately forecasting the opportunity cost against the benefit that it would deliver.
Right. You must have, so when you are engaging with the sports community, what were the various activities that you all worked on to enhance the campaign and to reach out and to get more consumer engagement in the process? What were the different aspects that you all touched upon?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think brands have got that challenge on an ongoing basis. We were very agile. We looked at, it was a long-term relationship, so we sponsored the Premier League for 15 seasons as title sponsor. So those objectives changed over time, so you have to be very agile in that respect. If you go back about 10 years, Barclays predominantly used it to grow the business globally, and what I'd probably refer to as sponsorship that's in infancy, based around brand, based around business development, credibility, and Barclays growing into new markets, particularly actually in Asia, Africa, as two key areas. That then moved forward as Barclays reduced its footprint slightly, much more around brand perception, trying to move trust, warmth, consideration metrics. If you go to the UK, where I'm based in London, everybody's familiar with Barclays. We don't have a great view of Barclays at times because it's your bank, it's very transactional. So how can we dial up some of those metrics? And you can see some of the activities and some of the key audiences and different businesses that we engaged. And to give you a bit of an overview of some of the data, if we actively engage a football fan, those metrics of trust, warmth, and consideration can go up by 20%. So propensity to engage with the business, to recommend Barclays, to do business with us, to speak highly of us increases. So again, you can start to dial up some of those more intangible metrics which go forward into that business case. You see some examples there. If top left, if you're looking at the screen, it was a really simple, very cost effective, but the trophy presentation to John Terry of Chelsea, Rachel Key made that presentation. And you probably don't know who Rachel Key is because historically it was a chief executive in a suit who'd hand over the trophy. We gave it to a community hero. So, and it was, okay, John Terry picking up the trophy was a bigger story, but to a football audience, we could convey that we were giving an unsung community hero that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that was life-changing. And Rachel's got an incredible story from a very deprived background. So activities like that, I mean, the middle and the bottom picture actually is a crowd shot from Mumbai when we came over here in 2014 to deliver Barclays Premier League Live. The Premier League is a big market for them. From a Barclays market, it was much more internal, so it was much more around colleague engagement. Our internal strategy for the sponsorship was based around colleague pride. We wanted to increase our colleague pride metrics, and we could do that through sponsorship. And again, football was the choice. Not everybody's a football fan, but quite a lot of them are, and it covered different geographies and different businesses for Barclays as well. A couple of others, the bottom right, you can see there is a Barclays Premier League branded credit card that was launched in Africa. People just wanted those credit cards because they're fanatical about it, and it sounds a bit direct from commercial return, but we generated tens of thousands of customers overnight, and the business still retains them now. So again, you start putting those numbers back into the business. And top right is probably the most effective in terms of scale, but we launched Barclays Ticket Office many years ago now, probably over 10 years ago. the mechanic probably wouldn't get away with it now, but if you took money out from an ATM, your receipt had a code on and you could win tickets, hence Barclays Ticket Office, but it was at ATMs, and it just drove footfall into branches, and Barclays just dominating, literally people seeking out a cash machine because they know they could have an instant win with tickets. So being quite creative around how we could deliver the sponsorship, and that hopefully gives a bit of a flavour of some of the areas.
Right. I also wanted to ask you about the challenges. For example, you joined Barclays in 2010. That was just 2 years after the crisis. And the way banks, and especially Barclays, were perceived was going into a negative terrain. So how do we, platform like Premier League or any other sporting event help you change perception?
You're very right in terms of there was a big challenge that should we be investing in these properties in multi-million-pound budgets into sponsorship. There were challenges. Certain individuals who said we shouldn't sponsor the Premier League, for instance. Barclays had gone through a time where there was a negative perception of Barclays. There was actually a negative perception of the Premier League in the UK, particularly players' wages, diving, etc. So is that something we wanted to be aligned with? So I think there's always constant challenges. It goes back to the point before about, and we probably did a shift in recent years, is that we probably had about 100 metrics across sponsorship that we measured. And typically you would measure sponsorship, create a document, and you'd be giving it to a senior executive, and it's not in their business language. So it sounds very simple, but it was a slight shift. We just put those metrics into the business scorecard. So anyone familiar with Barclays, there were 5 C's which Barclays measures themselves on externally, and sponsorship could directly contribute into that, whether that was the community, colleague, citizenship, commercial, or customer. So they were the areas that we worked on. And I think at the end of the day, people are making business decisions. Yes, budgets are tight. Yes, it's a challenge. But sponsorship was front and center for Barclays, very integrated as part of its marketing strategy.
Right. Can you also give a sense of how it is measured, the impact that you make through the campaigns or the partnership or the kind of association that you have with the sporting teams or sporting events? Also, when outside we had discussed about how it's more about partnership. So can you explain how that also works in terms of brand building and engagement?
Yeah, sure. It's broadly 2 areas. So you can measure sponsorship from tangible, so what you're buying. So things come with a value, ticket, hospitality, some brand awareness in terms of that respect. So you get a value there. You can also look at the commercial side of it. So if you take the Premier League as a case in point, the Premier League was a corporate client, there's a value there. Barclays used to work on the foreign exchange trading. As you probably be aware, that's been increasing in recent years, so there's a bit more contribution from a commercial point of view. Indirectly, Barclays partnered and was a corporate bank of many of the clubs. It acquired many of the players as wealth clients, so you kind of start to capture some of that commercial data. You can see on the slide there, probably the 2 other broad areas are the media services, which again I'd refer to as the more traditional side of sponsorship, but there is a value there. And then the ones that you can see in red is kind of the evolution of sponsorship and much more into that partnerships area, which is around consumer insight and shifting perceptions. So if you add all that together, that used to be our scorecard and our dashboard.
Right. We can open the audience for questions, and then we'll go on to the next panel with mutual funds and insurance industry.
Okay, fantastic, Vivina. I think we can take a question or 2 now that we're, in the middle of the conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, perfect opportunity to ask what's on your mind. In case you have one, please do raise your hand.
Hi. So just one question is predominantly around the duration. For example, when you get into a sponsorship, especially what Barclays has done, you need to stay invested in the partnership for a considerable time. What we've usually seen is a lot of brands, they tend to kind of go for partnerships for a shorter duration, and they probably may not be able to see the results. From your experience, what do you really feel? I mean, for example, from Barclays' perspective, when did you really start seeing the results? That's...
Yeah, no, very good question in terms of life cycle. I think if you look at data, to take a step back, I think the average life cycle is around 4 years, and that's not just Barclays, that's the industry. I'll go back to the point before. It depends what you're trying to achieve. If you can achieve something within a year or 2 years or 3 years, whatever that might be, then that might be right for you. We touched on before around, particularly in the UK, that the word sponsorship's kind of slowly being phased out. It's been positioned around partnerships now, and not really putting a timescale either on it in a way that I think historically people before were, it was a 3-year agreement and then we're going to do a 3-year renewal, and it's typically how the industry works. So I think now is much more around partnerships. It's about building business relationships. It's about integrating it. And in a way, it goes back to that internal point that I don't think going to senior executives and saying we need this amount of money, it just fits into the business because it's delivering the returns, and they don't really see it as a kind of a left field sponsorship cost, which I think the industry saw it maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's just integral and part of the business.
All right, do we have another question? Okay, the gentleman here to my right.
Hi. So Barclays, the English Premier League has stopped taking title sponsorships. So since 2016 till now, do you think that Barclays, which had tremendous global reception because of the Premier League, how has it impacted the brand globally? And locally also in England, did it have any kind of impact in terms of reaching out to customers, reaching out to new audiences, reaching out to new markets? The Premier League would have helped, but now that for the last 3 years there's no sponsorship, how does it impact the brand?
Yeah, okay. Again, really good point. I thought that might come up around. Probably if I can give you a bit of background. So the money that you pay as a title sponsor gets split 20 ways across the member clubs. So each club gets an even amount. Some of those clubs felt that for some of the inventory they were giving, particularly perimeter boards, interview backdrops, what you might refer to as premium inventory that got high value, some of those clubs at a higher level could potentially sell that for more as opposed to giving it for a 20th of the central money. So that was a big factor on those conversations, and we talked about it before, being quite open with the rights holder. They've got objectives. The Premier League had an objective in mind, which is to generate some revenue, so quite fluid and agile in our conversations. That was their situation. We were at a position where, and bear in mind I left in 2017, so some of this is things that I was aware of and some of it is me looking on as an outsider now as a consultant. So Barclays, the recommendation internally was to do the official banking partner and not do the title sponsor because we could get it at less money and still keep the key things going back to the scorecard and the measurables, still keep some of the key things that we wanted. And a lot of that was driven by the commercial revenue, actually didn't impact it. Arguably we lost some branding and some association at a high global level, but I referred to it before, Barclays in some of those key markets doesn't need brand exposure, it needs brand positioning and the platform of the Premier League. You can still do that. So that was very much the rationale from our perspective. It then so happened in turn it worked for the Premier League as well because they were able to, as you said, remove a title sponsor positioning, have a flat structure of a handful of partners that still generated money. The clubs got their inventory back and Barclays remained as a partner, so it kind of was a win-win all round.
Okay, I'm pretty sure that we have more questions, but what we're going to do is I'm going to request you to hold on to those questions because we're going to actually extend this conversation to part 2. But before that, Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing a global perspective. I'm going to request Vivina and Jonathan to stay with me on stage because now that we've, had a global perspective, ladies and gentlemen, on sports sponsorships, we're going to extend this conversation and talk about the Indian experience. But before that, raise your hand if you know who sponsored the Mumbai Marathon for 14 years. Absolutely, no-brainer, right? So joining us on stage to extend this conversation are 2 gentlemen from the BFSI sector of India who are really going to talk to us about how they've taken sports sponsorships to really build on their brand's character. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome on stage Associate Director and Group Head of Marketing, PolicyBazaar.com, PaisaBazaar.com, Sai Narayan. And I must also invite on stage CMO, Reliance Nippon Life Asset Management, and Member Financial Literacy Committee, AMFI, Sandeep Valunj.
Now that completes BFSI. So we have banking, insurance, and mutual funds. Insurance and banking, we all are very familiar about fixed deposit. We know if we put 100 rupees and if they say 7%, you know you'll get 107 after a year. Mutual fund and insurance, the way it is explained or sold is very misleading and quite misunderstood. So starting from there, we'll start with insurance. It's one of the most missold products, and it's hugely underpenetrated in India, around 4% according to IRDAI. Considering it's 4%, it also means it's a huge market. And considering it's missold, it also means that it requires a lot of financial literacy and awareness. Also, another thing about insurance is that it has been associated with sports for very long. If you remember 1975 World Cup, it was a insurance company that sponsored World Cup. But still, insurance is underpenetrated and is widely missold. So how are you now as an company, as an aggregator, changing that messaging, and how are you going to reach out to the people through the sporting event? Let's start with that.
So, like you rightly said, you mentioned the term aggregator and the fact that while there are so many insurance companies already existing, and in the middle of that there was an aggregator called Policybazaar, which came in and tried to change the game, in which it has, and also used sports as a platform to build the brand. So I like to just go back a little and talk about the specific of the terms that were being used to the marketeers. So before Policybazaar, I've been in profiles in the insurance company as well, and there we always were told that you can never your insurance always sold. It's not bought. So the entire agency model, which is the sales agency, used to go and sell. So they always used to come back and tell the marketeers that insurance is sold and it's not bought. Consumers don't buy. And to be honest, they were kind of right, because no one wakes up in the morning thinking about insurance. It's a pretty down boring product. And but the way Policybazaar has tried to change the game is over the period of time consistently trying to communicate the fact that if you go back and see the most iconic campaign, which called out the entire campaign was around Ullu Mat Bano, and it was in fact the time when the mis-selling was at its peak. And it was a time when we started talking about pure protection products, which is term life insurance. Now again, if you have to take a step back, if you tell to consumers in India that you have to invest money and you'll not get anything in return, no one is going to put that money. So exactly what? So it's a boring product. You have to tell a consumer that you have to put money, but you won't get it. Your family will get it. So the clear reasons of why the underpenetration is there. But what we felt is that term insurance, life insurance, is the right product to advertise, because it is in the interest of the consumer, and it's also in the interest of a platform like us, where you can. That's why that was a time when a lot of insurance companies started advertising online insurance, and online insurance is extremely cheap as compared to offline. So we thought that it's a great way to acquire consumers, and also the right product for the consumer. Now.